The stars twinkled softly in the vast emptiness of space. An endless sea of darkness, dotted with distant points of light, stretched in every direction. At the heart of this dark expanse, a massive spaceship floated silently. Its sleek design gleamed with a silver glow under the light of a nearby planet. The ship was ancient, built by a race older than most civilizations, but it was a perfect reflection of its creators, mysterious, powerful, and precise. Inside the ship, a single figure stood at the command center, staring out into the void. She was not human. Her skin was a soft green hue, and her head was bold, with glowing markings running down her body. Her eyes, bright and white, held an ancient wisdom and a quiet strength that made anyone who crossed her path feel small and insignificant. This was Kylara, a warrior of her people, one of the most respected leaders of the alien race known as the Nyrans. The Nyrans had always been protectors. For millennia, they had watched over the universe, ensuring peace and order in the galaxy. They had seen countless civilizations rise and fall, but one thing they valued above all else was life, especially the life of children. They had a code, an ancient vow. No one would ever harm a child, regardless of their species. If any creature dared to break this sacred law, they would face the full wrath of the Nyrans. But now, something had changed. A new threat had emerged, one that had never crossed the Nyrans' path before. The humans. Kylara had warned them. She had warned all the other species in the galaxy. She had spoken of the consequences of harming a human child. Yet, no one had taken her seriously. They thought she was just another protector speaking in riddles. They thought the Nyrans were too far removed from the rest of the galaxy to truly matter. But they were wrong. The Nyrans were not just protectors, they were the enforcers of justice. And when a promise was made, they kept it. As Kylara stood by the window, the vastness of space stretched before her, but her mind was focused on a much smaller world, the human colony on the distant planet below. Her people had warned the other races about the humans. Their warnings had been ignored, their threats dismissed as nothing more than hollow words. But now, that same human colony was under attack. Kylara's voice, though soft, carried the weight of centuries of wisdom. "We warned them," she murmured, her words echoing in the silent ship. "We warned them all. Harm a human child, and you won't live to regret it." The human race had proven itself to be both fragile and incredibly resilient. Their children were their future, and the Nyrans respected that. It was because of this deep respect that Kylara had warned every other species. Touching a human child would bring the galaxy's greatest punishment. But now, someone had dared to break that rule. A dark shadow loomed over the peaceful colony. Unknown alien forces had begun their assault. The once tranquil world was now filled with chaos. Explosions rocked the surface, and the skies were filled with the sound of battle. It was clear that this was no ordinary attack. These invaders were after the humans, not the soldiers, not the warriors, but the innocent children. Kylara's hands clenched into fists. Her anger was like a flame, hot and all-consuming. It was one thing to attack a race of warriors, but to target children, that was a line that could not, and would not, be crossed. Her people had made it clear to the rest of the galaxy. No one harms a child without facing the Nyrans' wrath. But now, that warning was no longer just words. It was a promise that would be kept at all costs. The screen in front of Kylara flickered, displaying images of the ongoing attack. She could see the human children, small, scared, hiding behind whatever shelter they could find, trembling as the invaders approached. These children had done nothing wrong. They were innocent, and yet their lives were now in danger. Heart hardened. She had always known that the galaxy was full of dangers, but this was something different. This was a direct challenge to her people's honor, to everything they stood for. And Kylara was not one to let such a challenge go unanswered. They thought they could get away with it, Kylara whispered to herself. They thought they could harm innocent lives and face no consequences, but they will learn, they will all learn. The ship's engines hummed to life, and Kylara's expression became cold and determined. She had warned them, she had given them a chance, but now, the time for words was over. The Nyrans would keep their promise. The invaders would pay for their crimes. With a single command, the ship's weapons powered up. The bright lights of the Nyran warship illuminated the dark expanse of space as it prepared to descend on the human colony below. Kylara's gaze remained fixed on the planet below, her eyes full of rage and unyielding resolve. As the ship moved closer to the surface, Kylara's voice broke the silence once again. This time, her words were a final warning. No one harms a child, and lives to regret it. The camera zoomed out, showing the massive fleet of Nyran ships descending toward the colony, and the lights from their weapons flashing in the distance. The peaceful world of humans was about to change forever. The stage was set. The warning had been given, and now the galaxy would see what happened when the Nyrans kept their promises. The darkness of space seemed to close in around the ships, as the battle for the future of the human race and every child in the galaxy began. The peaceful human colony on the distant planet was quiet. The soft hum of life echoed through the small settlements as families went about their daily routines. Children played in the fields, their laughter filling the air, a sound of innocence and hope. It was a world untouched by the larger conflicts of the galaxy, a world where the simple joys of life went uninterrupted by the war and strife that plagued the universe. But this peace was fragile. Like a delicate glass window, it could be shattered at any moment, and no one could predict when or how. The humans were unaware of the danger creeping ever closer. They had been warned, though not by anyone they could understand or truly believe. The whispers of alien forces that had been watching their world for months were dismissed as nothing more than space. Myths, rumors passed along by travelers who didn't fully understand the forces they spoke of. The warning had come too late. From a hidden corner of the galaxy, far beyond the human reach, an alien race the Nyrans watched with cold, calculating eyes. Their deep knowledge of the cosmos and their strict code of justice had earned them both fear and respect across the stars. The Nyrans had never intervened in the affairs of lesser species unless they had broken a sacred vow, and the one rule, above all else, that could never be violated was to harm a child. The consequences for such a crime were always the same: death, swift and unforgiving. But the humans didn't know this. How could they? The Nyrans had never directly interacted with them. The stories of their power were just that, stories. In fact, the human race had never even come close to breaking the Nyran code. They were still learning, still growing. They didn't realize just how far the galaxy was watching them, or how much their actions would soon cost. From the peaceful colony, the first signs of danger were subtle. An odd pulse of energy was detected by the colony's scanners, barely a blip against the backdrop of the planet's natural readings. The few who noticed it shrugged it off as a malfunction. After all, this was a peaceful world. What could possibly go wrong? Their sense of security had made them blind to the rising storm. Then the attack began. It was swift, brutal, and unexpected. The sky darkened as alien ships, unlike any the humans had seen before, appeared above the colony. They weren't here to communicate or negotiate. They had come to conquer, to subjugate. The ships landed in perfect formations, their engines roaring as they hovered above the ground, sending shockwaves through the air. Panic spread like wildfire. The humans scrambled to defend themselves, but they were no match for the invaders' superior technology. The air was filled with the sounds of blaster fire, the whine of energy shields, and the cries of confusion and fear. The invaders made no effort to capture the adults. They were after the children. They stormed into the schools, the homes, the playgrounds, snatching up the young ones without hesitation. It was then that Kylara saw it. Her ship had arrived just in time. As the leader of the Nyrans, she had known it was inevitable that this day would come. Her people had warned the galaxy for years. They had said it over and over again: harm a human child, and you won't live to regret it. Yet the universe had chosen to ignore that warning. Kylara's ship hovered silently above the chaos below. She could see the terror on the faces of the children, their small hands reaching out for safety, their eyes wide with fear. These were the innocent ones, the future of the human race, and they were being taken by these invaders without mercy. But what Kylara saw most clearly was the violation. The attack was not random. It wasn't just about conquest, it was personal. The invaders were after the children because they knew that no one, not even the Nyrans, could let this go unpunished. The Nyrans had no tolerance for this kind of cruelty. It was a violation of everything they stood for, and Kylara could feel her anger rising like a tide, swelling inside her chest. She had seen battles, seen wars, and witnessed the destruction of civilizations. But this was something different. The destruction of a child's innocence was something that could never be forgotten, never be forgiven, and the Nyrans had vowed that whoever harmed a child would suffer. "Prepare to move in," Kylara commanded. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of generations. Her crew knew what was coming. They knew their leader would stop at nothing to uphold the Nyran code. The ship's weapons powered up, their energy thrumming with purpose. Kylara didn't need to say more. She had already made her decision, but the human children were not helpless. In the midst of the chaos, there were brave souls among them. Some of the adults had taken up arms, organizing small groups to protect the children. There was an unspoken understanding now. This was a battle for the future of their kind. These Humans, though not warriors by nature, were willing to fight for their young. For the future they had worked so hard to build. Kylara's ship descended, her eyes scanning the chaos below. She could see the human defenders fighting valiantly, but they were outmatched. The invaders had advanced far beyond them. It would be up to her and the Nyrans to set things right. Kylara's ship touched down with a low hum, the landing gear settling onto the planet's surface. As the ramp lowered, a gust of wind blew across the battlefield, carrying with it the scent of fear and dust. The Nyran warriors, tall and imposing, stepped out in formation. Their armor gleamed in the light of the dying sun, and their eyes like Kylara's were filled with the cold, hard certainty of a people who knew no mercy when it came to breaking their sacred laws. Kylara raised her hand, signaling her warriors to spread out. She didn't need to speak. The invaders could feel the power radiating from the Nyrans. This was not a race to be underestimated. The Nyrans had arrived. The invaders, seeing the sudden shift in the tides of battle, hesitated for a moment. Kylara's eyes locked with theirs. There was no fear in her gaze. There was only the promise of retribution. As the invaders looked around, realizing they had underestimated the situation, Kylara spoke again, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. You made a mistake. You harmed the future of this galaxy, and now, you will pay for it. The Nyrans were here, and the galaxy would soon learn the true meaning of their warning. The invaders had never expected this. Their ships, powerful and ruthless, had hovered over the human colony with an air of arrogance. The destruction they'd unleashed was supposed to be swift, a signal to the galaxy that they were the ones in control. But now, as they stood in the midst of the chaos, their confidence was fading fast. The unexpected arrival of the Nyrans had shifted the battle's balance in an instant. Kylara's eyes scanned the battlefield, her gaze piercing through the chaos as her feet touched the ground. The dust swirled around her, but she remained still, unfazed by the noise and confusion. Her presence alone was enough to send ripples through the battlefield. The air seemed to grow heavier as the Nyran warriors moved into position behind her, their armor reflecting the dying light of the sun, their eyes glowing with the same cold intensity. The invaders had come with a single purpose, to capture the human children, but they had underestimated the galaxy's oldest protectors. The Nyrans were not here to negotiate. They were here to correct an injustice, one that could not be allowed to stand. Hold your ground. Kylara's voice rang out, cutting through the din of battle. The Nyran warriors immediately spread out, their movements fluid and calculated. They moved as one, an unstoppable force of precision and power. They didn't need orders to know what to do. Their mission was clear: protect the innocent, punish those who would harm them. Kylara's eyes locked onto the invaders' leader. He stood at the front, confident and cruel, watching the human defenders struggle against his forces. He had expected to crush them, to sweep through their defenses and take what he wanted without consequence. But the Nyrans were not so easily defeated. The invaders' leader sneered, clearly irritated by the unexpected turn of events. You've come to stop me, Nyran. His voice was thick with disdain. You're too late. The children are already ours, and you, he pointed directly at Kylara, his finger shaking with arrogance, will not stop me. Kylara stepped forward, her posture calm yet commanding. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation in her movements. She had seen this before: arrogance in the face of justice. She knew how to deal with it. You are wrong, she said, her voice cold. You will not leave here alive. The price for harming a child is one that cannot be paid in anything but death. The invaders' leader chuckled, his eyes narrowing. Do you think you can defeat me? You are just one race, one ship. There are hundreds of us here. You are outnumbered. Kylara's gaze never wavered. She stood there for a moment, her mind calculating. The Nyrans had never fought in fear of numbers. It was never about how many you had, but how well you fought. And the Nyrans had fought battles across the galaxy, facing enemies far greater than this. There are many who have thought the same as you, Kylara said softly, almost as if speaking to herself. They have all learned the same lesson. Without warning, she raised her hand, signaling the Nyrans to advance. The battle began in an instant, the clash of weapons and energy shields filling the air. The invaders, now realizing that the Nyrans were not to be underestimated, began to fight back with desperation. Kylara's eyes stayed focused on the leader. She knew that if they could eliminate him, the rest of the invaders would scatter. But she couldn't afford to let her attention wander. Every life lost in this battle, every child taken, was a reminder of what they were fighting for. The stakes were higher than any single victory. The Nyrans moved with deadly precision, cutting down invader after invader. Their weapons glowed with an eerie blue light, their strikes clean and efficient. Each movement was a calculated blow, every action designed to ensure that the enemy could do no more harm. Kylara moved forward, her steps silent but powerful. She could hear the leader's taunts from across the battlefield, but his words no longer mattered. What mattered was the justice she would bring to those who thought they could escape the consequences of their actions. The invaders' leader watched in growing alarm as his forces fell one by one. He had expected the Nirans to be a nuisance, something to brush aside, but now, it was clear that this was no ordinary enemy. Kylara, with her unwavering determination and the strength of her people, was a force that could not be easily defeated. Enough, the leader shouted. He turned to his forces, his voice laced with panic. Fall back, we must retreat. But it was too late. Kylara's eyes narrowed. This was the moment she had been waiting for. With a final surge of energy, she pushed forward, cutting through the remaining invaders with ease. Her warriors followed, their movements swift and unstoppable. The leader's forces were crumbling, their attempts at escape futile against the Nirans' precision. Finally, Kylara reached the leader. He was standing near a group of human children, using them as shields, his hands shaking as he tried to hold them back from the Niran warriors. You think you can use them to save yourself? Kylara asked coldly. You're wasting your time. The leader's face twisted in anger. You don't understand. These children, these humans, they are weak. They are nothing compared to us. I have no choice. Kylara's gaze hardened. There is always a choice. You chose to harm them, and now you will pay the price for that choice. With a swift motion, Kylara stepped forward, disarming the leader and sending him to his knees. The human children, terrified but safe, watched in silence as the Nirans' justice was carried out. Kylara's eyes softened for a moment as she glanced at them, her mind flickering with the realization of just how precious they were. The invaders' leader was a broken man, trembling in the face of his inevitable end. Kylara raised her hand once more, and with a single command, the battle ceased. The invaders had been defeated, but the message was clear. The Nirans had come, and they had delivered the promise they had made long ago. No one, no matter how powerful, would harm a child without paying the price. The battlefield was silent, save for the crackle of dying energy shields and the distant hum of the Niran warship hovering in the sky. The once chaotic scene had transformed into something almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the destruction that had come before. The invaders, once so confident in their numbers and their technology, now lay defeated. The survivors, broken and scattered, had been left with one undeniable truth. They had made a fatal mistake by underestimating the Nirans. Kylara stood amidst the remnants of the battle, her eyes scanning the horizon. The human children, once in danger, were now safe, huddled together under the watchful eyes of the Niran warriors. Some of the adults had come forward, cautiously offering their thanks, but Kylara could see the wariness in their eyes. They didn't fully understand what had just happened, or why it had happened. They had been saved, but by whom, and at what cost? Kylara could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about the battle that had been won. It was about the message that had been sent. The Nirans didn't intervene lightly. Their code was clear, and it was absolute. They protected life, especially the lives of children, and today, they had upheld that code in a way that would echo across the stars. Yet Kylara couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was only the beginning. She knew that the galaxy was a vast and unpredictable place. Other forces, other species, would see what had happened here today and think it was nothing more than a single, isolated event. They would believe that the Nirans had come and gone, that they could return to their lives without consequence. But Kylara knew better. This was far from over. As she stood there, her mind drifted back to the leader of the invaders, the one who had dared to use the children as shields. His arrogance had been evident from the moment they met, his belief that his power could protect him from the wrath of the Nirans. But that arrogance had cost him everything. The Nirans were not a people who tolerated such cruelty. They never had been. And now, he had paid the ultimate price still. Kylara understood that his death would not undo the damage that had been done. The children were safe, yes, but the memory of what had happened here would linger. The human race would never be the same after this. Their innocence had been shattered, and there was no going back from that. The invaders had shown them that the galaxy was not as peaceful as they had once believed. But what truly troubled Kylara was the question that had been left unanswered. Who had given the order? Who had sent the invaders to harm the children? In the first place, the leader they had defeated was only a pawn, a small piece in a much larger game. The galaxy was filled with power-hungry factions, and Kylara knew that the real threat still lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike again. As she pondered these questions, one of her warriors approached, a tall figure clad in shimmering armor. His face was expressionless, but Kylara could feel the weight of his presence. "Commander," the warrior said, his voice low but firm, "we've secured the perimeter. There are no more threats. The children are safe." Kylara nodded but didn't look away from the horizon. "Good, but this isn't over. The ones behind this attack will not rest until they've achieved their goals." The warrior remained silent for a moment before speaking again. "We too track them down." "We will," Kylara said, her voice cold with determination. "But not yet. There's something we need to understand first. We need to know why this happened, who orchestrated it, and what their true intentions are." The warrior nodded, acknowledging the gravity of her words. He understood. The Nirans had always been protectors, but they were also seekers of truth. They didn't just fight, they sought to understand, to uncover the roots of corruption and evil that festered in the galaxy. This attack, though a direct violation of their code, was part of something much larger, something that would require their full attention. Kylara's gaze shifted toward the human children once more. They were still huddled together, their faces pale with fear, but they were safe. For now, that was all that mattered. But Kylara couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in her gut. The invaders had come for them. They had come for the most vulnerable members of the human race, and there was no telling who else might target them next. "Make sure the humans are prepared," Kylara said, her voice steady. "They will need to rebuild, but more importantly, they will need to understand what has happened. They need to know that the Nirans are not their enemies. We are their allies, and we are here to protect them." The warrior gave a brief nod before stepping back, leaving Kylara alone with her thoughts. As she watched the humans begin to regroup, she couldn't help but wonder how they would adapt to the truth that had been thrust upon them. They had lived in peace, unaware of the dangers lurking in the depths of space, but now, that peace had been shattered, and they would never be the same again. Kylara felt the weight of her people's duty settling upon her shoulders. She had led them into battle, but her true role was just beginning. The Nirans were not just warriors, they were guardians of a fragile, vulnerable galaxy, and that role came with a burden that few could understand. The galaxy was vast, its mysteries and dangers stretching out beyond what any one species could comprehend. And yet, here, on this small, seemingly insignificant planet, Kylara had found herself at the center of a storm that threatened not only the future of the humans, but the balance of power in the galaxy itself. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. Kylara turned away from the battlefield, her eyes set on the horizon. She knew what lay ahead. The Nirans would stop at nothing to uncover the truth behind the attack, and they would do whatever it took to protect the innocent. The galaxy would soon learn that no one, no matter how powerful, could escape the reach of the Nirans. They had been warned, and now, the consequences of breaking their sacred code would unfold across the stars. The battle was over, but the tension in the air remained thick, like a storm waiting to break. Kylara stood at the edge of the battlefield, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the last remnants of the invaders' forces were being rounded up. The Niran warriors had proven their might, but something in Kylara's chest tightened. The victory felt hollow. It wasn't the bloodshed or the destruction that haunted her, it was the realization that this attack, this violation of their sacred code, had been planned. Someone had orchestrated it, someone powerful, someone patient, and most importantly, someone who believed they could escape the Niran's wrath. Kylara's hand clenched into a fist at her side. The leader of the invaders had been just one part of the puzzle. The real question was who was behind him, who had sent these forces to harm the innocent, who had dared to break the one rule the Nirans would never allow to be violated, and why had they chosen to target the humans' children, of all things? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. She didn't need to turn around to know it was one of her trusted lieutenants. The warrior approached, his steps firm and resolute. "Commander, we have secured the prisoners. We've gathered everything we could from the wreckage, but there's no sign of any larger fleet nearby," the warrior reported, his voice steady but filled with concern. The invaders' leader was carrying a communications device. "We believe it was encrypted, but we've started decrypting the information." Kylara nodded. "Good, but we need more than scraps. I want to know who was pulling the strings. I want to know who sent them here." The warrior hesitated for a moment. "We've already reached out to our allies in the outer sectors. No one recognizes the symbols or the ships. Whoever this enemy is, they're operating outside the known networks." Kylara's eyes narrowed. It wasn't just that they were operating outside of known space. It was the manner in which they had acted. The leader's arrogance had been unmistakable, but there had been something more, something deeply calculated. The invaders didn't just strike at the humans. They had struck at their very foundation. Children were the future of any race, and the attack had been symbolic, a message sent to say that no one was safe, not even the innocent. Continue the decryption, Kylara said sharply, turning to face the warrior. But be careful. If this enemy is as smart as I think they are, they'll know we're coming for them. We don't want to give them a chance to escape. The warrior bowed his head, acknowledging her command. Understood, Commander. As the warrior departed, Kylara stood alone once again, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. She could feel the quiet around her, the soft murmur of voices from the human survivors, the Nyran warriors tending to their wounded comrades. For a moment, the peacefulness of the scene almost felt like a lie, a fragile illusion masking the storm that was coming. Kylara took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. She had a duty. The Nyrans had pledged to protect the children of every species, and that promise was sacred. It was more than just about one victory, it was about sending a clear message to the galaxy. No one harms a child and lives to regret it. She turned toward the human survivors, many of whom were now gathering around the makeshift shelters that had been set up in the wake of the battle. Their faces were filled with fear and uncertainty, but there was a glimmer of something else, to hope. Hope that they had been saved, hope that someone, something, had come to stand between them and the darkness. The Nyrans had been their shield, but what would happen next? Would they be abandoned once the danger passed? Kylara knew she couldn't allow that. The Nyrans didn't just save lives, they protected them from the shadows, from the threats that most other races couldn't even begin to understand. But her people weren't known for staying in one place for too long. They were always moving, always watching, ready to intervene when the galaxy needed them. The question now was whether the humans would accept them as allies, or fear them as conquerors. Her thoughts were interrupted once again by the crackling of her communicator. She stepped away from the survivors and activated the device. A holographic projection flickered to life before her, revealing the face of one of her closest advisors, a fellow Nyran who had been stationed in the outer sectors. Commander, the advisor began, his voice serious. We've intercepted a transmission. It's not much, but it's a lead. Kylara's pulse quickened. What is it? It's a name. The transmission was brief, but there's one consistent word. We've found an Iraq. It's the name of an ancient warlord, a rogue faction leader from an empire that collapsed millennia ago. He was thought to be dead, but the transmission suggests otherwise. Kylara's mind raced. Narak. She had heard the name before. It was a name spoken in whispers, a name tied to a history of violence and cruelty. If he had somehow returned, if he had rebuilt his forces in secret, then the galaxy was in grave danger. The children, Kylara muttered, her mind piecing together the puzzle. He's not after just the humans, he's after the future. The children are a symbol to him, a reminder of the strength of life. He wants to destroy that strength before it can grow. Her advisor's voice crackled through the communicator again. We've traced the transmission to a hidden sector. It's heavily guarded, but we believe it's the source of Narak's operations. Kylara's jaw tightened. Prepare the fleet. We're going after him. She closed the communicator, her mind already shifting to the next phase of that mission. The invaders' forces had been nothing but a pawn in a much larger game, and now, the true enemy revealed itself. Narak was a force of darkness, a shadow in the galaxy that had survived centuries. He would not stop until his twisted vision of the universe was realized. The Nyrans had given their warning to the galaxy, but now it was time to make good on it. Kylara's people had promised to protect the innocent, no matter the cost. And the cost, she feared, would be high, but there was no turning back. The storm had arrived, and the Nyrans would stand firm, ready to face whatever darkness Narak had unleashed. It was time to make him regret underestimating the Nyrans. The stars stretched out before Kylara, cold and distant. Her ship, a sleek marvel of Nyran engineering, cut through the darkness like a knife, heading toward the unknown. The crew moved with purpose, each warrior focused on their task, but beneath their calm exteriors, Kylara could sense the growing unease. They had been to war countless times before, but this mission felt different. It wasn't just the weight of the battle they had just fought. It was the nagging uncertainty that filled the air. Narak, his name had sent a ripple of fear through the Nyran command structure. He was a legend being shrouded in darkness, his empire falling centuries ago, leaving behind only whispers and ruins. But now, somehow, he had resurfaced, and the galaxy was on the brink of something far worse than a single invasion. Narak was a force of nature, a tyrant whose hunger for power had driven him to the farthest reaches of space. If he had rebuilt his strength, if he had truly returned, the galaxy would never be the same. Kylara stood at the helm of her ship, the vastness of space unfolding before her. She could feel the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Her people had sworn to protect the innocent, to defend those who could not defend themselves. But this enemy, this ancient warlord, was different. The Nyrans were warriors, fierce and honorable, but even they had their limits. Kylara knew that what they were about to face was unlike anything they had encountered before. The ship's sensors pinged, pulling Kylara from her thoughts. A small, encrypted message had been received. She stepped forward, her heart quickening as she opened the transmission. The message was brief but clear. The enemy is closer than you think. Time is running out. Kylara's mind raced. The message wasn't from any of her allies, it was from someone inside Narak's camp. She had expected resistance, but this was something different. Someone on the inside was trying to warn them. But why? Was it a trick? Or was it a genuine plea for help? She couldn't afford to take chances. "Commander," came the voice of one of her lieutenants, breaking her concentration. "We've arrived at the coordinates. There's a hidden base just ahead, cloaked by a field of debris." Kylara's eyes flickered toward the star maps on the ship's console. The debris field was dense, a graveyard of old ships and forgotten technology. Narak had always been cunning, using the remnants of past wars to hide his movements. If they were going to find him, they needed to move carefully. "Prepare the crew," Kylara said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "We're going in, no mistakes." As the ship descended into the debris field, the scene outside the viewport shifted, the stars swallowed by the shadow of the wreckage. The battlefield was like a graveyard, silent and foreboding. Pieces of long-dead ships drifted aimlessly, their once proud hulls now twisted and broken, a haunting reminder of the many lives lost. The debris stretched out for miles, offering the perfect cover for someone trying to stay hidden. Kylara's eyes narrowed. Narak wasn't just hiding here. He was using this graveyard as his fortress. This was his domain now, and they were intruders. The thought didn't bother her. The Nyrans had never feared the dark corners of space. But the fact that Narak had chosen this location meant he was planning something big, something that required secrecy. The ship's systems beeped, warning of a nearby energy signature. A faint pulse, barely detectable, had come from the heart of the debris field. It was subtle, but it was enough. Kylara's instincts flared. Narak had set up a trap, and they had just walked right into it. The warning came too late. From the dark corners of the debris field, ships sleek and deadly emerged, their weapons powered up and aimed directly at the Nyran ship. Kylara's heart skipped a beat. These weren't just any ships. They were advanced, far beyond anything the Nyrans had seen in recent years. The Narak Empire had not only survived, it had evolved. "Shields up," Kylara barked, her voice cutting through the tension. The crew scrambled to comply, but Kylara could already feel the weight of the situation. This was no ordinary ambush. Narak was making his move, and he was playing his cards with the precision of a master tactician. The first shots came almost instantly, bright, deadly streaks of energy that lit up the darkness of space. The Nyran ship shook under the impact, its shields flickering as the enemy closed in. Kylara gripped the armrest of her chair, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to lose control. If Narak had truly rebuilt his forces, then the fight they were about to face would be more than just a battle. It would be a test of everything the Nyrans stood for. "Return fire," Kylara commanded. The Nyran ship's weapons blazed to life, energy blasts cutting through the void and hitting their targets with deadly precision. The enemy ships responded with equal force, their firepower overwhelming in its intensity. For a moment it felt like the galaxy itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final move. Kylara's heart pounded in her chest. The ship's sensors were beginning to fail under the pressure. If they didn't break free from this trap, they would be sitting ducks. She needed a way out, but the situation was growing worse by the second. Then something unexpected happened. The enemy ships, those that had been attacking, suddenly pulled back, retreating into the depths of the debris field. Kyla mind raced. Was this a trap within a trap? Had Narak anticipated their every move? "Prepare for anything," Kylara ordered, her voice cold and sharp. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she knew this was far from over. Suddenly, a new message flashed across the console. It wasn't encrypted, but it was clear enough. "You are too late." Kylara's blood ran cold. The voice, calm, cold, and unmistakable, belonged to Narak himself. "We've been expecting you, Kylara." His voice echoed over the comms, each word dripping with malice. "But you're not going to find what you're looking for. The galaxy has already been reshaped, and you've played right into my hands." The message cut off abruptly, leaving Kylara to absorb the grim reality. They weren't here to stop him. They were here to witness the final stage of his plan. The galaxy was already in his grip, and now, the Nyrans were the last piece of his puzzle. Kyla realized then that Narak had never intended for them to win. This was a game of destruction, and the Nyrans had walked right into it. As the ship moved deeper into the heart of the debris field, Kylara knew they were entering Narak's lair. There would be no escape without a price. The stakes were higher than ever. The only question now was whether the Nyrans would rise to the challenge, or be crushed under the weight of the storm that was about to break. The darkness of the debris field was suffocating, pressing in from every direction. The Nyran ship, battered but not broken, drifted through the graveyard of ancient ships, its hull creaking under the strain. Kylara stood motionless at the helm, her gaze fixed on the flickering console, where the last message from Narak still burned in her mind. The galaxy has already been reshaped, and you've played right into my hands. Every word had felt like a cold knife lodged deep into her chest. Kylara had always known that war wasn't just about fighting battles. It was about understanding your enemy, knowing their every move. But Narak had played her and the Nyrans like a puppet on a string. They had walked right into his trap, and now, the very fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden jolt of the ship. The sensors were flashing warnings, but Kylara was already moving, her mind sharp and quick. She hadn't expected an easy ride, but this was different. The gravity of the situation settled into her bones. Narak wasn't just some isolated threat anymore. He was everywhere. His influence had seeped into the farthest reaches of space, twisting everything he touched. The Nyrans were no strangers to powerful enemies, but this was something new. This was a war that would change the galaxy, a war for the very soul of every species in the cosmos. The human race, so young and fragile, was caught in the middle of it all, and Kylara had made a promise, that no matter what happened, she would protect them. The ship rocked again, this time harder. The crew scrambled to respond, but Kylara could see the fear on their faces. It wasn't just the battle they were facing, it was the uncertainty of it all. Narak had outmaneuvered them at every turn, and now, they were trapped in his lair, shields at full power. Kylara commanded, her voice a sharp cut through the chaos. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. The crew moved with practiced precision, but the enemy was relentless. They had no intention of letting the Nyrans escape. From the wreckage of the old ships, more enemy vessels emerged, their designs sleek and deadly. Narak's forces had the advantage of surprise, and they were using it to full effect. Kylara's hand clenched around the console. They were too late. They had underestimated Narak's reach, his ability to rebuild from the ashes of his empire. He was no longer just a warlord, he was a master of shadows, a being who thrived in the dark corners of space. His fleets, hidden in plain sight, were a testament to his cunning. As the enemy ships closed in, Kylara's mind raced. She needed to find a way out of this, but the options were few. The Nyran ship was strong, but it wasn't invincible. The shields were holding, but for how long? And more importantly, they had no way of knowing what Narak had planned next. But as she stood there, a realization hit her. It wasn't just the Nyrans who had underestimated Narak, it was everyone. The humans, the other species, the entire galaxy had written him off, thinking his empire was nothing but a myth. But he had never gone away. He had been biding his time, waiting for the moment when the universe would least expect it. And now, that moment had arrived. Kylara took a deep breath. There was no time to waste. Prepare to jump to warp speed, she ordered. We can't stay here. We need to find Narak's command center. That's where we'll end this. The crew hesitated, unsure, but Kylara's confidence was unshakable. They couldn't afford to hesitate now. Narak was playing a long game, and they had no choice but to play it too. With a final command, the ship's engines roared to life, and the stars outside the viewport stretched into lines of light as they shot forward, disappearing into the depths of space. For a brief moment, Kylara allowed herself to feel the adrenaline of the escape. The Nyrans had survived this long by being relentless, by never backing down from a fight, and now, they were about to take the fight to Narak himself. The warp jump wasn't flawless. The ship shook violently as it tore through the fabric of space, but Kyla remained steady, her mind focused on the task ahead. This wasn't just about saving the humans anymore, it was about saving the galaxy. If they couldn't stop Narak, then no one would be safe. He wasn't just a threat to the Nyrans, he was a threat to everyone. The ship emerged from warp speed, and the stars around them twisted back into place. They were no longer in the debris field, but in the heart of Narak's domain. His command sent a massive fortress built into the side of a dead moon loomed ahead. The structure was imposing, a jagged monolith that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Kylara felt the weight of what they were about to do. There would be no turning back. The stakes had never been higher. This was the final confrontation. The Nyrans had always prided themselves on being defenders, protectors of life. But this time, they weren't just defending. This time, they were hunting. They were hunting Narak, the one who had dared to challenge everything they stood for. Ships' sensors locked onto the fortress, and the team prepared for landing. But just before they made contact, a voice crackled over the comms. "You think you can stop me, Kylara?" Narak's voice echoed through the ship, smooth and mocking. "You are too late. This galaxy is mine now, and there is nothing you can do to change that." The transmission cut off, but Kylara wasn't shaken. She had come too far, and there was too much at stake. She stood tall, her eyes burning with determination. "Prepare for battle," she said, her voice filled with purpose. "This ends now." The landing sequence began. The crew readied themselves for what awaited them. They were entering the heart of darkness itself. But Kylara knew one thing: they would not back down. The Nyrans had fought too hard for this moment, and they would fight even harder to ensure the galaxy would never fall. Under the shadow of Narak, the battle was just beginning. But this time, it was a battle that would decide the fate of everything.